All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vanessa with ITS Communications, and today we're going to be talking about email security and just regular security policies all around with Alexandra Smith, who is part of our security and identity team with ITS. We've also got Danny Bonsenor, who's part of our infrastructure team, and just kind of a general whiz about some of the security settings with our with various applications we have. So he's going to be answering some questions that you have in the chat at any point in time. You can just add your questions there. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know we are recording this session. So probably tomorrow morning, I'll send you guys a follow-up email with a copy of the video as well as any helpful links that we talk about today. And like I mentioned before, Ali will be taking questions periodically during the session. So you can leave them at any point in the chat window. You feel free to post questions in there at any point. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask over your microphone, just raise your hand. If you go to the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a button in there called raise hand. I'll see it and just unmute you so you can ask any questions that you'd like. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Ali. Ali, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Vanessa and everyone. All right, so let's get started. Today we will be learning about email security. So I'll be going over some different tips to keep yourself safe and also some of the services that ITS offers to keep you safe when using your email and just some good security practices. So what are we learning today? We're going to be learning about why email security is important, what phishing is, some examples of phishing emails, and also how to use the phish alarm button. Some other ways that hackers could try to steal your credentials, such as consent phishing, browser attacks, and how to protect yourself from both of those, what a data breach is, how to protect yourself from them, and also some services that ITS offers to keep your data safe, such as #encrypt, file transfer service, and OneDrive, and what you should do if you do accidentally send sensitive information to the wrong person. We'll also go over a few resources, our contact information, also some helpful links. So why is email security important? So there's a number of reasons why it's important, but there's a few examples from the news recently that I wanted to show you guys as to what can happen if you let your guard down a little bit with email security. So the first one is an example from Ukraine. So the Ukrainian CERT, which is their computer emergency response team, has been warning their citizens of a new phishing campaign that's been aimed at them. So there have been emails being sent to the citizens with the subject line as the Ukrainian word for attention, and it claims to be from a domestic email service called ukr.net. But in actuality, the email address is actually coming from India. And the message warns the recipients of an unauthorized attempt to log into their accounts from an IP address based out of a city in eastern Ukraine. So it seems like something that could be possible. So it tells citizens to click on a link to change their passwords immediately. However, this attack is actually being carried out by the Russian Federation Special Services, and they even hacked into 20 user accounts from 2 automotive companies and 1 academic institution in India in order to carry out this attack instead of using their own accounts even. Another example recently in the news where email security was pretty important was Michigan Medicine. So they had to notify about 2,900 patients that some of their health information may have been exposed when an employee's email account was compromised. So some emails and attachments were found to contain patient information, such as names, medical record numbers, birth dates, and diagnoses. And they had to put in some additional technical safeguards after the breach to make sure this doesn't happen again. And they've been giving their employees some cyber attack training and education documents. Unfortunately, a month before this happened, Michigan also had a separate breach where 270 patients were notified that their health information had been accessed by someone who wasn't supposed to be viewing it. An employee had actually started accessing some information of users that he knew personally through his local community from December 1st to January 25th. So once Michigan found out about the breach, they fired the employee, revoked his access, and notified the patients who had had their information viewed by someone who was unauthorized. Another recent example of email security in the news has been a recent Google phishing scam going around. So An email impersonating Google, they have the iconic Google G in the message, has been going out to users saying, warning, your Pixel 6 Pro is severely damaged by 13 malware, all in red font to try to cause alarm. There's a button at the end of the email saying, clean my device, that claims it's a powerful Google approved application that will instantly remove the malware. However, it's really a link that will take users to unwanted websites or show aggressive pop-up ads that may trick the user into giving their sensitive information. And the last example that I think is really important is the SANS Institute. So SANS stands for Sysadmin Audit Network and Security. And the SANS Institute is a private US company founded in 1989 that specializes in information security, cybersecurity training, and selling certifications. So in August of 2020, the SANS Institute had a data breach that exposed roughly 20,000 records containing PII because of a malicious O365 add-on. So one employee got an email that seemed like it was coming from SharePoint, and they accepted the permissions that the email was asking for, and then the employee's account was hacked, and a forwarding rule was created because of the permissions the employee accepted that forwarded the employee's email to the hacker, so they were able to get into the information in the account. So it sent about 500 emails from the user's inbox to that hacker after the application was consented to. So the fact that even a trusted source of cybersecurity could fall victim to these schemes just shows how important that email security is. So on this next slide, a little bit closer to home, some of the email attacks that are happening at Weill Cornell. So our proof point detection software actually blocks about 99.4% of malicious email attachments, but 0.6% do get through. And the top 5 families of email attack campaigns that we see here at Weill Cornell, number 1 is consumer phishing. So emails from common websites you shop at, like Apple or Amazon, scammers will pose as them to try to get you to input your credentials or any other information. The second biggest category we see is corporate phishing. So a scammer will pose as Office 365 or one of the other business applications that you use in order to get your business credentials. The third most common attack campaign that we see is ransomware. So the hacker will send you an email with an attachment or link, and if you click it or open it, ransomware will be downloaded so the hacker can take your files for ransom or delete your files. And then the fourth most common attack campaign that we see is targeted for banking. So the hacker will send malware designed specifically to steal passwords related to the banking websites that you use. And the last most common campaign that we're seeing is stealer. So the hacker will send emails with malware designed to steal or harvest passwords in these emails. Out of all of the email threats that we see, the most common is malware at 70.7%. And then the next most common is phishing at 20.6%. And the last most common is spam at 8.7%. So spam is a little less harmful than these malware or phishing attacks. So I've been talking a lot about phishing, and I just want to go over what exactly is phishing. So phishing emails are sent by scammers to try to trick you into giving them credentials or downloading files that could harm your computer. They'll then use one of these methods to gain access into systems or steal your files or steal your information. So phishing emails typically have 3 common elements. The first being a call to action. In order to succeed, a scammer needs you to do something. For example, downloading a file, clicking a link, replying with information, or contacting someone. A scammer can't get the information that they need without actually having you do something to help them get this information. And in order to get you to comply with their demands, they typically use emotion or urgency. They want you to act without thinking. They don't want you to analyze the email. They don't want you to think about who it's coming from or why you're doing what you're doing. They just want you to quickly click on a link, open an attachment, or send information. So they often create a sense of urgency and try to manipulate your emotions. And the common emotions they try to manipulate are fear, curiosity, greed, or compassion. So by fear, they may threaten that they're going to hold all your files for ransom if you don't respond. Or with greed, they may send you an email that says you've won a gift card for $1 million. Or compassion, they may claim to be someone who's in a poor financial state who needs money and will pay you back at some point. And the last element that they use is malicious intent. So all phishing emails are designed to cause harm, whether to you or your organization or whoever it be. They are designed to cause harm and use you as the vector to cause it. For example, they typically intend to steal data or deliver malicious software. So there's a few different ways you can protect yourself from an email phishing attack. The most important being paying close attention to the different parts of the email. So the sender details and the subject. For example, in the sender details, who sent the email and who received it. A recent example of a phishing email I received an email message from Dr. Jill Biden. I don't know Dr. Jill Biden, and I'm definitely not important enough for her to email me. So I knew at once that this was a phishing email and not exactly Dr. Jill Biden sending me an email giving me $1 million gift card. That seemed a little too good to be true, and definitely not someone I talk to on a frequent basis. And also looking at the sender details, seeing if the sender's using a free email address. Would you expect someone from your bank to be using a free email address? Probably not. They'd probably be using their banking email. Also looking at the subject is important too, and being especially careful with subjects that contain the external tag here at Weill Cornell. So you should especially exercise caution if you weren't expecting the email. Anyone at Weill Cornell or our partner affiliates is not tagged with the external tag. So NYP, Columbia, MSKCC, HSS, and Rockefeller are not tagged. So if someone's sending you an email saying they're a Weill Cornell or NYP employee and it's coming out as external, then you already know that this may be an indication it's a phishing email. Also, as I mentioned before, be wary of emails that promise rewards for little to no effort or seem to be too good to be true. So if you do get an email from someone claiming you've won a $1,000 gift card for doing nothing and all you have to do is click here, that could be a pretty good indication it's a phishing email. Evaluate if the tone and language of the email matches who you would expect from the sender. So what was the purpose of the email and what does the email contain? Would you expect an email from your boss to contain a very generic greeting when you two communicate pretty frequently? Probably not. Or a communication from a colleague where you're pretty informal with each other, but the email is very formal and very vague. You probably wouldn't expect that. So that could indicate that it's phishing. And another good tip too for your personal email is to hover over links to ensure that they are actually the URL that you're going to. So if you hover over a link in an email, in the bottom right of your screen, there should come up with the actual URL it'll be taking you to. Here at Weill Cornell, we have Proofpoint to protect you from malicious URLs. So those URLs will get rewritten. So that's a little bit of a better tip for your personal email accounts. However, with your Weill Cornell email account, another thing you can do is if you receive an email telling you to click a link, type in the actual URL that you know for the website. So if you get an email from Google saying your account has been compromised and you need to clear your account or reset your password, actually go to Google's website as opposed to clicking that link in the email to make sure that you are actually going to the correct website. And then if you do get any suspicious emails, please report them to ITS using the Phish Alarm button. Don't click any links or open any attachments until you receive a confirmation from ITS that this email is safe. So from the few things that we've learned, I've got this example of an email here. And I wanted to see if you guys can see right off the bat anything in this email that seems a little sketchy that could indicate it being a phish. If you want to raise your hand or put in the chat why you think this email might be a phish. I'll give you guys a minute or two to read. I see the
Microsoft, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very good one. I see Ronald's raised his hand.
Let me go over to Ron. Ron, you should be able to unmute if you'd like.
Yep, they already put it in the chat. They beat me to it. Microsoft. That's a big one that I see a lot. Well, at least for the ITS fishes. But yeah, I'm always looking at those addresses.
Which is good. I also see someone too writing "gone forever," sense of urgency. That's a good catch as well. And that it's externally tagged. That's another good catch. Since it is external, do be careful with replying to emails like this, especially if you weren't expecting them. So you guys caught most of the reasons that this was a phish. So the Microsoft, it's spelled incorrectly. Microsoft would not be using an email that spells their company name incorrectly. And also there is a grammatical mistake here within 31 days. And as one user mentioned, after 31 days, deleted files are gone forever, creating that sense of urgency. So you'll just want to click on the link to quickly get your files back.
There's another good point in the chat, Allie, that there's no department called Weill Cornell Medical Microsoft team.
That is another very good point. That's a little bit tougher if you don't know all the different departments here at Weill Cornell, but that is a very good catch. And I see too, Danny has called out that it's saying WCMC as we are branded as WCM. So that's another good catch to note. So then I have another email here for you guys to take a look at to see why this might be a phish.
Oh, Gilbert says IRS sends letters and not emails.
Yeah, that's a really good catch, especially for first point of contact. IRS will not send an email. First point of contact from the IRS is always a letter. So if you've never received a letter from the IRS and get this email, then it's definitely a phish. And I see too, the email address from the sender looks suspicious. That's right. So the IRS wouldn't be using an email address like this.
Oh, there's a grammatical mistake.
That's another catch. The IRS would definitely be checking for spelling and grammar before they said something. The attachment too is sketchy that they included that, especially when they have that link to say claim my payment. All right. So you guys made a lot of good catches there. The email address, definitely not something the IRS would be using. And also too, as you guys mentioned, the IRS typically does not email people, especially for first contact. So if you never received a letter from the IRS and you get an email from an IRS, it's not from the IRS. The other thing too, the claim that you now get $815 for doing nothing. If you haven't done your taxes recently, or you've already filed your taxes and nothing's changed, that large sum of money, getting that for little to no effort could mean this is a phish. Also too, there is a threat down here, deliberate wrong inputs are criminally pursued and indicated. So trying to get you to act quickly so no action from the government is taken. So the last one I have here, let's see if you guys can see why this one might be a phish.
Amazon, somebody mentioned in the chat.
That's right.
Another typo offered. Sense of urgency, regards WCM is fishy. No full address for Weill Cornell. Why would Amazon know how hard you work? That's a good
That's a good one too.
External tag. Yeah, lots of good ones in the chat.
Yeah, these are all good reasons as to why this would be a phish, especially the Amazon immediately sticks out. It's no branding too. That's another very good point. Offered being spelled wrong, the threat of before the link expires. Also too, like you guys mentioned, the signature as well as generic. There's a lot of different elements as to why this email is a phish, and you guys caught all of them and more that I had on there. Phishers trying to tempt you to get a free Amazon gift card. That's right, trying to get you to click the link with some sort of reward. All right. So I've talked a little bit about using Phish Alarm when you get a suspicious email. So Phish Alarm is a tool in Outlook that allows you to select an email and report it to ITS with a click of a button. So depending on which version you are using, Outlook 365 versus Office 365 on the web, or if you're using a Mac, Windows, iPhone, or Android, the button may be in a different place, or it may say report phish as opposed to report email to ITS security. If you don't see this button at all, you may need to pin it to your Outlook ribbon. And later in the resources that I have at the end of the presentation, we have a knowledge base article on how to do that. So once you use Phish Alarm, these emails are routed to our Proofpoint threat detection software. And Proofpoint will analyze the email to determine whether it's a bulk email, malicious, or requires additional analysis by one of our analysts. If one of our analysts does need to take a look, they'll review the email in depth and then follow up with you on the threat level of the email. Again, as I mentioned earlier, do not click on any links, open any attachments, or reply to the email until you receive a confirmation from ITS that the email is safe. So we've talked about email phishing. What are some other ways that a hacker could steal your credentials? Another way is called consent phishing. So consent phishing attacks trick users into granting permissions to malicious cloud apps that are posing as legitimate third-party web apps. These malicious apps can then gain access to the user's cloud services and data. So typically these apps look like they're hosted by legitimate providers such as Microsoft's identity platform, and users will typically click accept because it looks like it's coming from a legitimate website. And this will grant the malicious app the requested permissions to the user's organizational data. Threat actors who perform consent phishing will target users who can grant access to their personal or organizational data directly. And if your Weill Cornell 0365 account is compromised, you can put yourself, other users, and the institution in jeopardy. Once consent is granted, it's permanent until you revoke access for the application. So if you agreed to all of these apps' permissions, they would retain those permissions to your information until you revoke them. Even if you change your password, even if you enable two-factor authentication, this app would still have all of these permissions until you actually revoke access to the application. So sometimes threat actors create these fake apps that seem benign, but have all of these different levels of permissions that can access your data. So these are not the consent applications or the third-party applications that I'm talking about consenting to, but I just wanted to show this to you all because this also shows how reading permissions is important. So I pulled this from a website called Terms of Services Don't Read or Didn't Read.org, TOSDR.org. And this shows some of the popular applications we use, what permissions that we've actually granted them. So for Facebook, your identity is used in ads that are shown to other users. That's definitely something I wouldn't want to have my information used for. But once you log in and create a Facebook account and agree to their permissions, this is what you're using. And these are all super popular applications that I'm sure a lot of you use. I use them too. And this just shows that not reading the terms of service and what permissions an application is using could cause your data to be used in a way that you really don't want it to be used. So what can you do to prevent or protect yourself from these attacks? So understand the data and the permissions an application is asking for. So the biggest permission to be careful of is be careful of consenting to an application that's able to access your data, even if you aren't using the application. If an app asks for that, that's a very high level of permission that you probably don't want the app to have. Also, similar to for phishing emails, check for poor spelling and grammatical errors in the app consent screen. Sometimes these scammers may be quick in what they're doing and may not have put the care and attention into looking at spelling and grammar for these consent apps. Don't rely on app names and domain URLs as a source of authenticity. Hackers can fake those. And a good rule of thumb is applications from Microsoft verified publishers are best to use since they've been verified by Microsoft. And they have a little blue check mark on their name like this one does here. Only use your Weill Cornell credentials for applications that are work or school related. So if you do need to use one of these third-party apps and consent to the permissions they're asking for, try to use or definitely use your Weill Cornell account only for applications that are for school or business purposes. If you have a personal application that you'd like to use your personal account just to keep your work account safer. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this consent is retained by these applications, whether you change your password or enable two-factor authentication. The only way to change the consent is by revoking it yourself. So clean up any unused web apps from having consent to your data. You may want to review and revoke these permissions or clear saved account credentials on a regular basis in order to keep your data safe. ITS does have a knowledge base article on how to do this that I'll have later in the resources section. So another type of attack hackers can use to get your data is a browser in the browser attack. So this is a new strategy that replicates the single sign-on process to trick users into inputting their credentials. So the differences between a real request for credentials and the scam are very subtle and sometimes undetectable. So the GIF to the right actually depicts this attack. Although everything on the login screen looks like it could be legitimate, it lacks the branding that Microsoft typically uses for their sign-in screen. It actually kind of looks like the hacker may have copied the way Google does their sign-on screen. So that's also another tell that this is not the normal Microsoft sign-on screen. The last thing there is at the bottom, it says copyright at 2022 email update. Microsoft would probably have a copyright for Microsoft and not this generic copyright there. Again, these are all really subtle differences that indicate this is actually a browser in the browser attack, as opposed to a real request for authentication. So how do you protect yourself from these kind of attacks? So don't sign into an application where you did not type the URL in yourself. Similar to phishing emails, if you get an email from your bank saying your account's been compromised, how you should go to the bank's website as opposed to clicking that link. Same thing for applications here. If you're clicking a link and it asks you to sign into Facebook, actually go to Facebook's URL as opposed to just clicking a link that says you're going to be signing into Facebook. The same strategies used to determine phishing attacks should be used here as well. So check for poor spelling and grammar in these consent application screens. Also, as mentioned in the slide earlier, look at the sign-in window and see if it looks like the window you normally use to sign in. So does it have the same branding? Is everything spelled correctly? Do you see the same formatting of the screen? And there's hardly any difference between the two screens on the right. So this shows how sophisticated these attacks are getting. The real and phishing are almost indistinguishable. The real just has a little bit of a difference here in the banners and also the ability to scroll down, while the phishing one does not. So the last thing we're going to cover is, what is a data breach? So a data breach is an incident wherein information is stolen or taken from a system without the knowledge or authorization of the system's owner. So this can either be by the user or a threat actor who has stolen the user's credentials. So this can range from you accidentally sending a patient record to the wrong person, to a hacker logging into your email and downloading your entire inbox and sent folder. And it's important to note that breach is a defined term under the HIPAA breach notification rule, and all breaches are potential until confirmed by a risk assessment. So if there is a potential breach of PHI, there is a prescribed process for declaring it a breach under HIPAA. So as mentioned with the Michigan case earlier about the user that logged in and used and looked up the personal information of users that he did not have a business need to look up, that was a breach and he wasn't supposed to be doing that. So these breaches can occur by either the actual user misusing their credentials, or if you get hacked by a scammer that misuses your credentials by forwarding your emails out, like the first Michigan hack, or using your email to perform other phishing attempts. So what can you do to protect yourself from a data breach? So before you send an email with any information, but especially sensitive information, make sure that you're sending it to the right person. So take a quick check to make sure it's the right email, it's the right person you're supposed to be sending the information to before you hit send. Also, make sure that emails containing sensitive information are encrypted. So sensitive information, whether that be in the body of the email or the attachments. And sensitive information includes things like PHI, PII, financial data, and information similar to that. So you can do this by using #encrypt when you're sending emails with small attachments, file transfer service for larger attachments up to 35 gigabytes, and then OneDrive for files up to 1 terabyte. We do have forced encryption between us and our affiliates. So if you're sending an email to someone within Weill, Cornell, NYP, MSKCC, Rockefeller, HSS, Cornell, Ithaca, Columbia, or Qatar, you should be okay to not use #encrypt, but it is a good practice just to keep yourself in the habit of doing. Also, just practice all the aforementioned security recommendations just to reduce your chance of getting phished and letting a hacker into where you store your data. And the last thing to remember is when you're communicating sensitive data with patients, use Weill Cornell Connect instead of the methods above. So #encrypt. So encrypted email is used to secure confidential data being sent outside of Weill Cornell's secure email network. As I mentioned earlier, that includes addresses of our affiliates, so any email addresses outside of our affiliates. And that includes sensitive data such as PHI, PII, financial data, employment records, research data involving human subjects, and also user account systems or passwords. So #encrypt is really easy to use. All you have to do is type #encrypt into the subject line of your email to encrypt the email, including any of the attachments. So the person you're sending the email to will receive an automated message with instructions on how to receive your encrypted email. If the recipient hasn't logged in before, they'll need to create an account. But hashtag encrypt should be used when sending any sensitive information to external recipients. And you can encrypt emails up to 35 megabytes for internal recipients with this method, so within Weill Cornell. You can typically send emails up to 25 megabytes to external recipients. However, depending on the mail system that they are using, the email could be rejected if it's too large. So we recommend using file transfer service to encrypt emails containing larger attachments. So file transfer service provides Weill Cornell faculty, staff, and students a secure and convenient web-based solution for transferring large files that exceed the email attachment limits to recipients within the institution and external recipients. So you can transfer files up to 35 gigabytes there, and this is the link that you can use to get to transfer.weill. You could send messages to both internal and external users using this method. And for external users, there will be a step-by-step instructions on how to register will appear after they click on the button to access files. You can also use file transfer service to request a file from other users that you would like to view. Both file transfer service and hashtag encrypt are great for sending encrypted email to other users. As I mentioned before, though, Weill Cornell Connect should be used if you're communicating with patients. And the last service I wanted to talk to you guys about is OneDrive. So OneDrive is the preferred method for storing Weill Cornell high-risk data, PHI, PII, etc. So it can be used to share files with Weill Cornell users, and Weill Cornell users are able to share files with peers at any of our affiliates, and also anyone with a .edu email address. So you can share files with your coworkers via a link, so they can review or edit the content instead of sending large attachments that people have to download and open. You can also sync documents stored in the cloud to your computer or your device so you can access files offline. You can store files totaling up to 1 terabyte of data, so it's great for storing super large files or a lot of files. We also offer an external access request form, so you can enable OneDrive collaboration with users from another institution if you're working on a specific project that requires them to collaborate or a research protocol. So if you do accidentally send sensitive information to the wrong person, or you believe that a hacker has gotten into your account and accessed some of your files or emails, or any other security or privacy incident occurs, you should contact your supervisor and then ITS Security, ITS Service Desk, or the Privacy Office. You can contact any of the three, but definitely contact your supervisor as well, just to make sure that they're aware of the incident. So that's all of the information I have to go over with you all today, but I have some resources here. So we've got some helpful links for phishing, how to report spam to ITS. We have a one-pager on how to use the phish alarm, and then a more detailed phish alarm guide on how to use phish alarm depending on your OS. The email response examples from phish alarm and what they mean, how to revoke permission from old web apps from accessing your Microsoft 365 data. So those applications that I was talking about consenting to, if you want to revoke some of them from applications you're not using or ones you think have too high permissions, you would use this knowledge base article to figure out how to do so. The terms of service didn't read. This is kind of unrelated to the phishing stuff we went over today, but if you do want to look at some of the applications that you use frequently and what permissions they're asking of you and using your data for, this is a good resource. Some links for OneDrive, the OneDrive service page, how to manage your files in OneDrive, and also how to install OneDrive on an Android or an iPhone or iPad, and then how to start using OneDrive on a Mac. And then we also have a link for the OneDrive external request form that was mentioned. And some helpful links on encrypting email. So how to encrypt your email, the encrypted email service page for hashtag encrypt, the file transfer service page, and also how an external user could reset their password for file transfer service. And then lastly, I just have some contact information for myself, Danny, and then the ITS security team. So if you guys do have any comments, questions, concerns that you want to reach out to us about what we went over today, or anything in general email security related, please feel free to email one of us or all of us, and we'll get back to you and make sure your questions are answered. So with that being said, that's all the information that I wanted to cover with you guys. So do you guys have any questions?
Oh, Neil, can you send the presentation slides to everyone? Allie, if you want to forward me the slides, I can make sure everybody gets it in that follow-up email.
Yeah. So yeah, you guys will get all of the links then from the resources.
Also, I'm not sure if everybody's looking at the chat, but there was a really good point that Brian made. Somebody had mentioned that Proofpoint obfuscates the links if you want to hover over them to see who's messaging you. And Brian did mention that there was a decoder site available called decode.weill.cornell.edu to see what that link is actually going towards. I'll make sure that that's added in the follow-up email as well, but that's definitely a good resource, I think, if you're interested in where those links are actually going to.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Vanessa and Brian. And like you mentioned, Vanessa, we could send it out in the follow-up email, or two, I can even include it in the resources in the presentation so people have the links all in one place.
Oh, and you must be on VPN if you're outside of our network to access that decode URL. I'll make sure to add that little pointer in the email. Thanks, Brian. Are there any other questions for Ali or Brian or Danny today? Again, you could post it in the chat or raise your hand and I can unmute you. Good. Great job, Ali from Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Let's give it another few seconds to make sure, but you're getting some thank yous and thank you from me as well for covering the session. This is a really important topic. I think, everybody's affected by phishing attempts, especially lately. I feel like I'm getting so many more and it's just good to know, what's out there to protect you.
Yeah, I agree, Vanessa. And thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, we just got a quick question from Joel. Do you recommend two-factor authentication?
Yes. So here at Weill Cornell, we have Duo for mostly everything. So you have two-factor authentication for everything, but for your personal accounts too, I would recommend some sort of two-factor authentication.
Yeah, Joel, I know personally, especially for like my bank account, my Google accounts, in the security settings, there is for those types of accounts, a two-factor authentication option that I feel more comfortable using. I mean, my bank is, my lifeline so that I can live. So I, if I have to go through the extra step of just getting a code sent to my phone so that I can verify my identity, I think that's a very small inconvenience to make sure my information is protected.
Agreed.
It doesn't look like we have more questions, so I'll wrap up the session. Again, I've recorded everything, so I'll get this out to you by tomorrow morning with all the links that Ali sent, as well as the presentation and anything else we talked about in the chat that may be useful to you guys in the future when it comes to email security. But thanks again to Ali, to Brian, to Danny. I think we also have some other people in the security team on, so thank you all for coming and teaching us more about email security, and have a great rest of the day, guys.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, everyone.